So our theme for today is about pastoring, about caring for a congregation pastorally, strategically, and financially. What's up next? Now, most of you are aware that there are a number of states that have started opening up. Texas, as I mentioned, has more than one church that's going to be starting this Sunday. If you need a haircut, you can go to Georgia, I'm told. Also, you could get a tattoo and your nails done if you'd like. But here in California, if you want to go outside, you need to wear a mask and a hazmat suit, and you can only be outside for 30 seconds before they'll call you on your cell phone. So very, very different situations. Restaurants and movie theaters are opening in Texas and being told that they can only have 25% of capacity. And I wonder if that counts for churches. During this whole time, our members have been staring into the TV or onto their laptops and watching YouTube after YouTube, whether it is from the White House or the State House or the county seat of folks saying, this is what we need to do, no, this is what we need to do, the back and forth. And it leaves them feeling fearful and frustrated, is a phrase somebody used the other day that stuck in my head. So we decided we'd start with caring for our congregation pastorally by bringing in Dr. Connie Horton. Connie serves here at Pepperdine University as the Vice President of Student Affairs. Somebody asked me about that title. We don't have affairs amongst our students, but Connie's responsibility is to look over student issues. She has so many things that she rides over. What I know her as is one of the best counselors I've ever come across. Connie is a wonderful Christian lady. She and her husband are involved at the Conejo Valley Church of Christ. But here on campus, she is known as a wise, wise leader. So, Connie, what do you think?
Well, I think people are feeling any number of things. You have people who are thinking this is all a big overreaction. You have people who are grieving. You have people who are highly anxious. You have people feeling all different kinds of things. And so I think being a pastor, being a minister during this time means having wise discernment about what different people will need as well as what the larger body needs.
All right, well, we'll make a note, be wise. All right, Connie has covered our needs on that aspect. All right, Connie, how do you care for a congregation? What are some general tips you can give us?
Yeah, are we putting the slides up?
I believe we can.
Okay, that'd be great. So first, let me just thank you all for what you're doing. Wow, what a challenging time to minister. And I appreciate the creativity and the perseverance and the ingenuity that you're all putting into this. So thank you so much on behalf of the Body Collective. Additionally, let me say before I get into a few tips that I'll just recognize none of this is rocket science. You all know this, you all are doing this, but perhaps just a reminder and encouragement here and there might be helpful. So first, let me just encourage you to remember that probably what your congregation needs more than anything is an authentic and warm presence. So be yourself, bring yourself, talk to them in just authentic, warm ways as you always would. Don't feel like with all this technology, you have to have the latest, greatest, super fancy as much as you need to be present for them in the moment of speaking to the body and when you're calling them or having individual Zoom sessions pastorally. Obviously, it's important to speak of the corona elephant in the room at whatever stage your community is in, by the way. You know, what's going on locally for you? Have there been a lot of scary things lately? Even in your congregation, has anyone been ill, etc.? Or in your community, is there a lot of disagreement about what needs to be going on, what's wise, etc.? It doesn't have to be the focus of every sermon and every pastoral congregation or conversation, but don't have your head in the sand or never speak of it. I think that would be kind of dysfunctional, to be frank. So then as you're moving to decide what your body needs specifically and individually as you're having pastoral conversations, listen really well. Listen really well. And then I think it's a balance from empathizing deeply, even with the hardest things. Seek to understand. Don't assume. You may have members of your congregation who you're surprised how upset they are. Maybe you didn't know they struggle with an anxiety disorder anyway, and this whole thing has escalated this. Maybe you weren't thinking about the way their loss last year is now coming up again. All those pictures of the hospitals, et cetera, is bringing things up for them. So be with them in it and empathize with them. And then balance that with hope. Not in a way that says, oh, this is no big deal, or minimizes or denies, but in a way that recognizes, yeah, this is hard. And this too shall pass, that God's people are resilient and God is with us in this. Be very practical about that. Help them find passages that they can meditate on, spiritual disciplines that they can use to help anchor themselves and center themselves and settle themselves. We find among our college students, a lot of them maybe grew up in youth group. They would say they're Christians, very important to them, but when the going gets tough or things are strange, they're not sure how to connect their faith. Help them figure out how to do that in very practical ways. Mm-hmm. And of course, service is good for the congregation and beyond. And interestingly, it's good for the people who are distressed too. That's not the primary reason to do it. But if they're involved in a canned food drive for your local food bank that's especially deprived right now, or calling the elderly in your congregation, et cetera, it gets the focus off of what may feel like a black hole of anxiety or depression or loss. And so getting them involved in service may be helpful as well.
Well, Connie, you mentioned the balance between being hopeful and being, what's the word, realistic, authentic, honest.
Yeah, be willing to hear the hard stuff, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard some people even get frustrated. If I have one more people tell me, oh, God's got this, or, well, it's all going to be okay. I mean, I actually believe God does have it. What word would you give to ministers who are trying to be hopeful and yet be authentic?
I think it's okay to not have all the answers, to normalize the questions, to normalize the wrestling with God, to normalize I trust that God is good and that God loves us, and I'm not sure why all this happens or why this would be happening right now, or when this is going to end, or why God doesn't end this right this minute. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know.
I'm so glad Jesus went into the garden and cried.
Right.
Because it told me he was normalizing it for us, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I know you want to speak about some of the vulnerable amongst us. Let me let you do that.
Yeah, we can put that side up too. I think it really is, again, it's not surprising perhaps to be reminded you've been thinking about these people, but think about them in the different stages, that while we're in the thick of it and the quarantine and the scariest times, sure, but even as we start becoming more able to gather, people are going to still have some stuff going on, emotionally, they're going to have different memories, et cetera. So for example, healthcare workers may need some support for now, for sure, if they're still caring for a lot of COVID cases. And even in the year to come, like imagine, you've seen on the news, people who have had multiple deaths of people in their care in one day, repeatedly. Imagine what that does to a soul. And so I think sort of like when there's a death in the congregation and everybody supports the widow for a few days, and then they struggle in the weeks and months to come and feel very isolated. And so it's important to remember some of these folks will need support for a long time in some cases. Health compromised folks, again, they may not be able, right now, if they're in a stay-at-home place, they may need to be especially careful. They may have understandable extra worries. And then it may be more difficult for them to just get back in community right away. Elderly, especially those living alone, this has been a hard season for them. And I think I was reminded of that with my own mom. My mom 81 years old, tends to be quite active and engaged, but during this time, boy, it's been so hard for her. When we had a phone call recently, it was really clear the toll it had taken. And so they will need support during the times where they're not able to get out. And then later, wow, what was that like? And how do we get you back in community when it's safe to do so? People who have lost jobs, of course, the financial stressors may be there for a time. Those who have anxiety disorders, this just gives one more thing to be anxious about and understandably triggering all that. And as I've already mentioned, those who have had loss or grief, even before this recently, this is a hard journey for them right now. There are others, there's an infinite variability of the human condition, but just notice the least of these in your church family in a special way and encourage others to do so as well.
Well, as you think about that, Connie, all of us are trying to build something that I know you're working very hard with us here at Pepperdine on, and that's resilience.
Yeah.
Help us with that, how important that phrase is right now.
Yeah, more than ever. And you're right. At Pepperdine, we're developing, because partly in response to the escalating mental health and anxiety that's happening among college students, we're developing a program called RISE, which stands for Resilience Informed Skills Education, to help them to, of course, there will be times where people have understandable anxiety and depression, people have genetic predispositions, they've had difficult life experiences, etc. But for so many people to be struggling so much is unfortunate. We want to get upstream a bit and teach people how proactively to take care of their mental and spiritual health, and then how to do that even in difficult times. So if somebody could put that slide up, that would be great. Because the truth is that anxiety has increased nationally, not just among college students, but among all of the population. So in your church families, clearly you've seen more and more people struggling. And so these tips or domains that are important for students to attend to are important for all of us to attend to. Again, I say this when I say to students, this is not rocket science. These are things your mom and dad told you. But the question is not, do you know it, but do you do it? And so for yourselves as ministers and pastors during this very demanding time, think about it for you too. And then think about ways, whether you have explicit classes about these kinds of things, or whether you just mention things in the moment of a pastoral conversation or a sermon where some of it's applicable. But basically, attend to these different parts of your life really helps you be more resilient. For example, physically, sleep, exercise, eating should not be minimized. When you're exhausted, living on junk food, not getting any movement in, you are just way more prone to feel anxious or depressed. So recognizing that we have to be good stewards of our body and take care of that. And I'm seeing okay, never mind. Socially is very challenging right now, but social support is one of the #1 predictors of resilience. When people feel isolated, whether it's the little bumps in life, in the road of life, or whether it's huge losses, or whether it's chronic stress or unknown things like pandemics, social support makes a #1 difference. And so if we can really help people get connected and encourage to take the time to get connected, even if it means a phone call or a Zoom call or a handwritten card or whatever, that is going to be very helpful to ourselves and to each other. Cognitively, renewing our minds when we're getting into catastrophic thinking, when we're getting into we can't possibly do this, we don't know how to do this, etc. Mike was saying at the beginning during the conversational time, one of my things I repeat all the time is you can do hard things. So yeah, sometimes life is really hard. This is one of them. And fortunately, by the grace of God and with the support of each other, we can do hard things. And we need to be giving that message clearly. Spiritually, a spiritual perspective, a spiritual family for sure. And then as I mentioned, I find that people need very practical ways. Okay, when I'm upset, when I'm having a panic attack, when I'm so sad I can hardly move, how do I connect my faith to my mental health or to my spiritual health in a practical way. Help them know how to do that. Service, as I mentioned, super important for both members of that exchange. And then finally, with the students, we're talking to them about life skills, which we're defining as time management, money management, and technology management, just 3 different dimensions. And you might say, oh, well, these aren't those times, but really, even during this quarantine period, it probably does make sense to think about those. You know, we can kind of get lost in time and get a funk, just sort of going through each day in a bit of a fog. It probably makes sense for many people who are struggling to get a schedule going, have some routines, go ahead and get up and get dressed in the morning, etc. Money management, of course, some will be very challenged with this right now if they've lost their jobs and so on. So we're going to want to be supportive of them. And then finally, technology, while it's our friend very much right now and lets us connect, it's also good to get off our screens even now. So those are some practical.
That is so true. I heard a presentation the other day in which the guy said, we're trying to live in a obviously agrarian society where we get up in the morning and go to bed at night, but then we're also trying to live in a tech society which never turns off the light, never turns off the internet.
Right.
So
it's too much.
Basic skills.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, some of the most challenged people may be those who've been at home quarantining with children. In fact, somebody told me, you ain't had quarantine if you don't have small children. So Connie, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, first, it's important, I think, to have a lot of grace for each other in these moments. This is a time for parents, if both are trying to work from home remotely, perhaps having very intense Zoom conversations and meetings while they're trying to get their little kids occupied or their school-age kids online. That's a lot. So a little grace for everyone's important. But one way I've encouraged parents to be thinking about this is to begin with the end in mind. Have parents consider, all right, when we get back to normal, when everybody can go to their places, what do we want our kids to remember about this time? You know, would they say, oh my goodness, I don't remember what that was all about, but my family was so stressed and mom and dad were yelling at each other and they were mad at us all the time? Or are they remembering, you know, wasn't sure what all that news was, but something big was going on. But, you know, it was this kind of sweet time that I remember in my childhood. I remember mom and dad were home and we were able to spend some time together. Yeah, we had to do our own individual stuff, but we also had movie nights and game nights in a way that we hadn't usually been able to. You want them to remember something good about this. As I would encourage you, as you're helping parents find their way, to keep the conversation developmentally appropriate. Little kids don't need to worry about this. They need to know that the adults got it, basically. Yes. They don't need to see news that's alarming or upsetting, and they need to be largely protected. When you get into grade school kids, they know something. They know their school's been adjusted, etc. Obviously, they're going to have a lot of questions, and it's appropriate to follow their questions, to give them honest information, but follow their lead in not overwhelming them. Adolescents, of course, can engage in a pretty complex conversation in terms of policy decision-making, in terms of public health issues, in terms of even theological concepts related to all of this. I think it's important just to gauge that by age and by personality, but then teach them explicitly how to do hard things, what to do with their worry, how they might help somebody else. All those kinds of things are important.
How to manage their exposure to media and gaming all day. Any comments about that?
Right. All those resilience things, teach them to your children.
A question about this. I had someone say, my kids feel like this is what we need to do, but I keep telling them what this. How would you address somebody who's trying to coach somebody who's having this going on at home and it's just not getting better?
Because they make these actually.
If they're having conflict with their kids and it's not getting better, is that what you're saying?
Especially teenagers who are like, I want to go and do, they're getting to go and do.
Oh, I see.
You know, and it's just, it's exacerbating it.
Yeah, again, I think you have to tailor it a bit to your individual kid's style about what's going to work. But I think you can try to persuade them with the information, and depending again on where you are and where the virus is in your area right now, you can show them the rationale, the science, what's being discussed, what the county policies are, et cetera. At some point, you're the parent and you do have to draw that line, but especially with adolescents, I would want them to kind of think that through. That being said, of course, empathize, must be hard. You hear your friends are getting together and I'm not letting you. That's yep. You feel like you're missing out. That makes sense. And I care enough about your health and the health of our community to be firm on this.
Yeah. I should have said this earlier to all our 100 viewers. If you have a question that's burning in your heart that you'd like to ask Connie, use the chat line down at the bottom of our screen. We've got some great folks. Thank you, Tammy Williamson and Catherine Walling, who are here socially distanced in the studio. But if you'll chat a question in there, we'll relay it at the end of Connie's presentation and maybe she can speak to that. So Connie, these empty churches that are just dying to be full, some of the members can't wait to get there. Others are saying, no, 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 no. What counsel would you give from pastorally caring for a church that is trying to think about and maybe begin to moving towards reopening?
Yeah, great. If you can put on that one more slide, that'd be great. I think you're right, Jeff, that we really do have to anticipate that there'll be a range of responses, just like there was initially. There will be when it's time for reentry. And there's a lot of good reasons for that, by the way. People who are health compromised, et cetera, are going to have a different appropriate response than those who are healthy and able to just engage as soon as it's allowed. So I think as your churches open back up, I would encourage you to anticipate that for some, this will be a fearful time. For others, they'll be frustrated, like, why didn't we do this a long time ago? And why isn't everybody else back? And, let's do this. I would normalize different responses and let that be okay. Celebrate when the time is right that we're able to gradually re-enter. That makes great sense. But don't be like, and we gotta all be here by X date. No, let people choose what is the best decision for them. If you're able to still record and make the services available to those who are still needing to stay home or feeling like they do, I think that's okay. And not just you, but also encourage your family, your church family, to not make assumptions, to not make judgments, to not shame anybody for this more gradual return to normal. Those same people who have vulnerabilities may still have vulnerabilities. Those who are immunocompromised are still immunocompromised. Those who have major anxiety disorders may still obviously have those. And so they're not going to want to be the first one back in. And that's okay. Another very serious thing you're going to want to be listening for is child abuse and domestic violence has been increasing during these times. We just talked about some sort of normal developmental frustrations that teens may be having with their parents during this time. But we can anticipate that there have been couples who are already fragile and now they've had additional stressors, unemployment perhaps, a lot of time in stressful environments with the kids and so on. That you're going to hear some stories and you want to be ready to hear those stories and respond with great care and diligence as you normally would, get them to the appropriate resources and make reports if you need to. And then finally, as we've already talked about, even afterwards, I think you're going to have some theological questions that you just want to embed into some of the conversations and the sermons, et cetera. Why did God allow this? What was that all about, et cetera. But again, balancing that with a message of faith and a trust that our God is a good God. And sometimes we're not clear about why all that's allowed.
Amen. Amen. Well, those are wise words. We're going to see if we've got some questions that are coming in as my screen is going in and out in the back. I may have COVID. I'm just not really sure. But let me throw one at you that I had written down ahead of time. When you think about handling these divergent opinions. Would you for a moment walk into, say, an elders meeting where you've got folks on one side of the fence and folks on the other side of the fence, and there sits the minister who is trying to sort things out and answer the question, what comes next for our church? Any coaching for them?
Always, that's a challenging one, but I would always say listening really well is going to be most important. Don't assume right away, why are people on divergent points of view? So for example, just giving time for each to fully share their point of view is important. And then maybe ask some questions like, what are you most afraid of? What are you most afraid of? So maybe one group is very afraid of people getting sick and being responsible that we did it too soon. And that now, wow, we have some very vulnerable people, and there could even be tragedy in our church, and I don't want to be responsible for that. Wow, when you hear somebody say that, even if you disagree with their timing advice, you're going to be more gentle. And if the other, it's like, wow, I'm afraid if we don't get together pretty soon, we're going to lose the sense of family, and maybe this congregation is not even going to last, or whatever. Okay, let's put all those fears and all those concerns on the table, and then let's find a way forward. But I would encourage making sure everybody's informed. What is your county saying? What are the scientists saying? Let's make these decisions with faith for sure, but let's make them informed as well.
I had one minister friend who said that his role in these meetings is to bring in the data and make sure that everybody is seeing both sides of the fence, at least exposing them to it.
Yeah, that's great.
One question that's come up is, can we get your slides? Connie, may we gladly send out your slides?
Of course. Happy for that.
Great. So here's a question, interesting. How can we use this time to share Jesus as we're in it and as we're moving out of it? Anything from the psychological perspective of, are we ambulance chasing? Hey, you may get COVID and die, so do you want to get right with Jesus now? How would you address that, Connie?
Well, I do think anxiety raises questions for people when they're fearful, and if they see you understanding that and feeling some of that, but being able to find your way because of your faith, I think that's important. I think just time alone, for some people it's cranked up because of the nature of their work, but for others it's slowed down. And when things slow down, a lot of the things that usually distract us allow opportunity for deeper thinking, deeper questions. So I think part of it is just be ready to hear your neighbor, to enter conversation when the moment is right. Maybe during these couple of months of staying at home, they've had a lot of questions and they may be more open to some conversations now. So I would join them where they are as they come out.
Connie, I have what may be the toughest question.
Uh-oh.
So what about baptisms? It's hard to baptize. It's 6 feet away. There's nothing more central for many to our faith than this experience of giving one's heart and life to Jesus. If you were sitting in a room of folks who are trying to sort that out, what would you encourage them to do with regard to coming to a healthy answer together?
Okay, so I don't have to answer it, is what you're saying.
Well, I'm throwing you a softball, but I want to know what you think.
Well, I think you facilitate the conversation. There's got to be creative ways to handle that in a way that's safe, in a way that honors God. And I trust a God who is full of grace and would be willing to trust people's hearts and intentions under these circumstances.
All right. I had somebody ask a question about teenagers online. They said, what are some good anxiety relieving techniques for teens during this time who may be struggling with anxiety issues, if I got that question right? Mm-hmm.
That's great.
And children.
That's great. One of the simplest things is learning to breathe. And you can put that in a spiritual context, is talk about how God has created our amazing bodies and our breath, and God gives us breath of life. And when we are anxious, when we're nervous, we tend to breathe very shallowly, and that makes us more anxious, which makes us breathe more shallowly all the way up to a panic attack. So part of it is just noticing your breath and then learning to breathe very deeply so that you can see your abdomen moving, your tummy for a little kid, like breathe in, breathe out, so big. There are also a lot of meditations on apps even that teens like either there's one called Calm, or there's one that is explicitly Christian called Abide, that has meditations that help settle you through anxious moments.
Great. Well, the most calming thing that most kids and teens can experience is the unperturbed presence of those that they trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I've got to say on the baptism question, I'm part of a congregation that is doing baptisms. They, glove up and suit up and, as you say, trust the Lord. But any of those issues in which people are struggling between, is this safe, is this right, and is this what God wants? Connie, could you just, last question, say a word about pulling the God card? Hey, we ought to have our services because nobody can tell us not to do it because the Lord said we've got to meet together, or baptizing someone. How would you help folks thinking about the God card?
I think if you can start the meeting, or at least interrupt the meeting if it's getting tense, and suggest what marriage literature calls benevolent assumptions. Can we assume that all of us are trying to do what God wants to do? Can we please assume that all of us care for this person who is trying to make this decision? Can we please assume that all of us are trying to honor God as we move forward, and sort of call it out that we're not going to pull that card on each other?
Wow. I want that on a poster. Can we assume that all of us are at least wanting to do God's will?
Yes.
We could shorten elders' meetings by 50%. Just if we put that up. Oh, Connie, I thank you for what you do. Thank you for being with us. Thank Tim for the good work he does. So put Tim and Connie Horton on your prayer list, all y'all. That's the least we can do. Lord bless you.
Thank you all for what you do. God bless your ministry.